Hello, hello, hey there. Welcome in to another Success exclusive. I'm Josh Ellis, editor-in-chief of Success Magazine, and my guest today needs no introduction. Our cover guy, once again, fronting the new May-June issue of the magazine is Tony Robbins. He's the world's foremost business and life strategist, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist. In recent years, he's committed himself to helping people simplify a sometimes messy industry, money and investment. His latest book, co-authored with Peter Mallouk, is The Path, Accelerating Your Journey to Financial Freedom. Tony, it's so great to be talking to you again.
Good to see you again, Josh. How are you?
I'm awesome. Could not be better.
Good. That's nice to hear in the middle of COVID. Some people's minds need a little up, but I wouldn't expect any different from you, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
First of all, I want to say this is at least your fifth time on the cover of Success that I know of. So I'm pretty sure that's
been around a long time.
When you were a kid starting out, a student of Jim Rohn, what would you have said to that future?
Well, you mean if I'm looking back to and talking to myself when I was that young man?
If you were that young man seeing you today, understanding what you had become, what would you think of that? I
would say, your obsession to end suffering of as many people as possible and bring joy and bring tools and strategy, be love and strength to people when they need it most, and to constantly learn will be fulfilled beyond what you're even imagining. I mean, there's no way I could have imagined that. I think my background, some pretty humble roots and a pretty tough environment. I had 4 different fathers. My mom was an incredible human being that I wouldn't be who I am without. But when she took alcohol and prescription drugs, it was a different person. And when the person you love most is trying to harm you physically, you have to really work on your head. And I always say if my mom had become or been the mom I'd hoped she'd been back then, I wouldn't be the man I'm proud to be today, because I had to become a practical psychologist. I had to figure out how to manage her moods and her states and anticipate what's going on, because I'm the oldest of 3, so I had to take care of my younger brother and younger sister. And so I developed skills that way I never would have had. But to think that those skills and that environment, and then growing up with no food would lead to, me feeding 2 families and then 4 and then 8, and then get to 4 million people a year. And now it's 100 million meals a year. In fact, I committed 10 years ago when I was working on my financial book, I said, I want to feed 1 billion meals. And we're already at just almost 700 million meals to my partners in Feeding America. And now I'm doing an X Prize to feed 1 billion people sustainably worldwide that I've sponsored and helped to fund that and brought partners in, and that's just begun. Or that I would be able to, free 25,000 children that are enslaved, to be able to fund that and actually go on some of those journeys, those operations. Or, I'm privileged enough to have a jet, not just have a jet, but to be conscious about it and say, what's my carbon footprint? It's 3,000 trees over 5 years. And I was like, forget that. I'm going to plant 100 million trees. I'm at 71 million already just in the last 2 years, right? So those things, or provide fresh water for kids in India and parents both that just don't have water and they're dying of waterborne disease. And all you got to do is get fresh water. Now I got 250,000 people a day I'm providing that for every single day, and it'll get to 1 million. So those were dreams way beyond what I could imagine. But I really want to honor Jim Rohn. I'm so glad you brought up his name, because he was one of my original teachers. I was obsessed with learning, and I was reading biographies and personal development and, the original Think and Grow Rich, all those books, As a Man Thinketh, Emerson's essays. But I went to a seminar when I was just 17 years old. I had a person I was working for that said, you got to check this out. And he gave me the philosophy that helped to guide my life to a great extent. A couple simple things like, as simple as it may sound today, but for things to change for you, you got to change. It's still in me from when I was 17, hearing him say that. I don't look outside myself. What do I got to change in me, right? Or for things to get better, you got to get better. Or I remember asking him, like, why? I've got these 4 fathers and we have no money for food. I mean, the reason I feed people is not because I'm such a good person. It's because I know what it feels like to suffer. I was one of those. We had no money for food at Thanksgiving, and, we would have survived. We had crackers and butter, but someone delivered a meal to our house. And so it stimulated me in ways I never could have possibly imagined. But so I asked them, like, why? Why are my fathers? They work so hard. Why did they lose their jobs? Why are we always broke? Why no food? And I said, it seems unfair. Somebody makes $1 billion in the stock market over here, and a school teacher here, makes $25,000 a year back in those days, right? 40, 50, 60 now, right? And I'll never forget, he taught me, he said, Tony, your frustration, I see it. He said, and you're feeling the inequality. He said, we're all equal as souls in the market, souls in the world, but we're not equal in the marketplace. And I said, what do you mean? And he's the one who taught me. He said, Tony, if you work at McDonald's, there's no disrespect, but you're going to make minimum wage because anyone can learn to do that job in such a short time. And the guy that you described that made $1 billion as a hedge fund, tell me an example. I don't remember the guy back then, but you could pick anybody today and say, well, how come he made $1 billion? Well, he provided a 40% return when most people are not getting a 1%. That means it would take somebody 72 years to double their money on their own. But if they go to him, they double it in 2.5 years. And he's doing that for institutions and organizations and nonprofits. And so he's providing hundreds of millions of dollars of value, or billions of dollars of value. And so he makes $1 billion. And so he said, you've got to work harder on yourself than anything else. And those philosophies, if I could have told that young man that those philosophies would lead to being able to work with every living president and 3 past presidents that have passed on, to work with royalty, to work with some of the greatest billionaire entrepreneurs on the face of the earth, some of the greatest actors, entertainers, business people, to work in prisons, to work with parents. I mean, just every area you could imagine, that I would be a leader called upon by leaders just by continually be obsessed with growing and giving. I think it would have been helpful. But I also think it would be helpful. I tell people often something I would have told myself then too, because I learned it the hard way, is like, when you begin the journey, you always overestimate what you can do in a year and you underestimate what you can do in a decade or 2 or 3, or in my case now 4. This is my 44th year doing this. I started when I was 3, of course. But so I just think I would tell him that, but I don't know if he would have fully believed it. I remember I set a goal, I was going to help 100,000 people. I was like, no, I'm going to help 1 million people. I was 17 years old, right? I never dreamed that I'd be able to work with billions of people through technology, or that I could work with 1 million people just less than that a week. Last week for 6 days, I did a seminar. COVID came, and I'd never imagined. I've always told people, be prepared for winter, and it's part of my mantra is teaching people, because I'm a student of history and it's always cyclical. And so, you have your 2000s, 1999, you have your 2008s, and now you got what we got now in 2020, 2021. And I thought it would just be a financial winter, or maybe even a war, but I didn't think it would be fear on Earth of humans being around other humans all over the planet, or the kind of draconian measures that would make people be forced to stay in their home would occur, that you couldn't go to church, but you could go to Costco, or that someone would take my industry and literally make it illegal in most countries in the world, because I do things in the size of 10, 15, 20,000 people, right? So can't gather more than 10 people together. And so the idea that all these tools over the years would allow me then to reinvent the entire industry when it was dead. I mean, we've literally brought it back to life, and now people are modeling what we're doing. I was like, I first said, I'll do this in movie theaters. I did years ago. We can only have 50 people. Okay, we'll get 10,000 movie theaters. We'll find a way to get that group in. And then they shut down movie theaters. And then we'll do it at churches. We'll rent churches all over, and we'll link them, no, they shut down churches. And then I finally said, I always said I'd never do this in people's homes, because I go 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 3, 4 days, 6 days in a row to bring up on the seminar. And I'm going to do that without a stadium, without the group dynamic, without the incredible music. I mean, somebody's house with a little speaker and kids walking by, no way in hell. But my desire to serve, and knowing people need what we're teaching right now in this environment more than ever, I figured out how to adapt. And I said, okay, I can't sit in some little screen and do a grandpa webinar. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find a building with 40-foot high ceilings. I'm going to build 20-foot high LED screens. And I said, I'll make it 50 feet wide. I'll make it 180 degrees on me in the front and the back. And I'll find somebody to develop some technology so they can have an app and they can click on it and create applause or laughter. So we're interacting. I want to bring them up full speed. And then I thought, we'll use Zoom for this. And then found out Zoom would only do 1,000 people. So I called the chairman of Zoom, Eric, and turned out he was a huge fan, and got him to open it up so we could do 40,000 people. And then now, like I said, last week, trained 195 countries. I trained 39,000 people. So just shy of 1 million people in 1 week. And so those are things I couldn't have imagined, but they all come from the right philosophy and the right strategy. And if you just have strategy, it shows you, how to do something. But having the right philosophy shows you why to do something. And I think it's the combination of those that's given me the privilege to be in a position where I can really connect and serve so many people in such a short period of time.
That 17-year-old probably be pretty impressed. We're as I mentioned, in this cover story, we're talking about The Path, the latest book, and I know you're working on a new one right now. But I wanted to get to the most recent one, The Path.
Yep.
You've written a couple financial books before this one. We talked to Peter Mallouk as well.
Oh, he's awesome.
What has made that writing partnership with Peter one that makes a lot of sense to you? I know you two are pretty aligned when it comes to some of your beliefs on financial planning.
Well, I think, we both know I've worked with Paul Tudor Jones. I think it's my 30th year, 29th or 30th year this year. And he's one of the top 10 financial traders in history. So I know a little bit in the subject area, and I've interviewed everybody from Ray Dalio to Carl Icahn to Warren Buffett, and people like Ray have become dear friends. So it's an ongoing experience of learning from these people. And so I had a lot of knowledge in that area, but what I was really concerned by is I wrote Money Master the Game, and I wanted to give the answer to anything you can understand financially in one place, 674 pages, but it did become #1 New York Times, and it's the best-selling financial book of the last 20 years, which is kind of nice. But when I was writing it, I was interviewing all these people, and my philosophy was, I'm tired of people being taken advantage of. It's not that these companies are mean or horrible, they're trying to hurt you, it's just they're corporations, and their #1 job is shareholder value, right? That's what they got to do. It's not their #1 job to give you the greatest possible return. So they sell your products, they get really nice margins on, they're not always the best, because the standard is suitability, as I'm sure you know. But there's another standard in finance that's rare. It's the fiduciary standard, the F word as I call it. And all it means is that person who you're talking to has to put your needs ahead of their own. If they tell you to buy Apple stock this morning and you go, they bought it this morning cheaper, and the afternoon it's up and they sell it to you, they got to give you their stock. They can't take that profit. That's how strong it is. But it's less than 3% of people that are true fiduciaries. And when I was writing this book and showing people, I donate all the money to feed people for Feeding America. I didn't take a dime from it. I just was tired of people being taken advantage of. And then I was like, people got to know what the costs are on their funds. They got to know what their real returns are versus what they think their returns are. So I spent $500,000. I built this software and I donated that also. And then if people at the end wanted help, I recommended 10 fiduciary firms that was considered to be the best. Right after I wrote the book, I found out about this gray area in the law called dual registration. And so you think you're talking to somebody who's required to look out for you. They're a 1-1 cap. But in the middle of the conversation, they do this and they become a broker. Now, there's nothing wrong with a broker, but brokers sell you stuff that isn't necessarily, ideal for you. And they are certainly not having to put your needs ahead of the firms. And that's just a fact. And so it made me crazy. And so I want to bump everybody off the foundation I built. But one of them was Peter Mallouk and CPI, creative planning. And I really respected him because, I'd obviously done my homework before I brought him on. He was the only one that wasn't duly registered. He was the only one that was only a pure fiduciary. And plus, here's a guy that, Barron's named him #1 independent wealth advisor 3 years in a row. No one's done that in history. And then, MSNBC, did the same thing. They turned around and ranked him on CNBC, I should say, #1 individual wealth advisor 2 years in a row. It's like, okay, he's got the track record. So we sat down and he started explaining to me in more detail about this duly registered approach and several other gray areas that they're not illegal, they're just immoral. You know what I mean? And I went nuts and I finally said, you know what, instead of promoting anybody else, what if we partnered and I send people to you? Because Peter's whole approach is, billionaires have their home offices. Somebody looks at every part of you. They're not just recommending a few investments. They're looking at your whole financial picture. What are your goals? What are your needs? What are your tax approach? What needs to be done here on your mortgage? They look at everything. And most people couldn't afford that in a million years. And Peter gives every client 7 experts that are there. And he does it at a price point that's ridiculous, less than 1%. For people with a little larger investment, it could be as little as 0.25%. It's just insane. And so I want to see how he did it. I got to know him. I saw his level of integrity. And I finally said, listen, let's write a shorter book for what's coming, because I knew the crash is going to come. It's pretty obvious, right? I said, let's do this unshakable. Let's show people, let's write in a shorter version. We did that. And it was a huge hit for people. And I watched his firm grow from, I think it was back in those days, 16, 18 billion, over 40 billion in assets. And it was just a reflection of the quality of what he delivered. And I was fortunate enough to be his partner in building a lot of that. So I'm not a part of the firm any longer, but I absolutely love what he does. And so when we're talking a little further and saying there's more details people need, let's write a thin one that gives people the path today from where they are to where they want to be. I said I was all in. And so I've been really, really grateful to be able to partner with him and helping so many people. And he's a man of the highest integrity. And just hear people all the time come back to me and say, I'm so grateful you taught me what to look for and how to measure people. Because I don't just say, go to Peter. I say, here's the criteria to look for to know you're protected and know someone, has got the track record of enough success that they're worth considering. And it's not hard to see that when you evaluate him or you look at other people's reviews of him, whether it's CNBC or Barron's or Forbes.
our theme in this issue of the magazine is financial freedom, and that's what anybody who picks up the book is after, and that's what our audience here is after.
Yeah.
It's been the talk of the nation in 2021, I guess. This clash between the populist investors, these social media movements, Reddit, and the hedge funds, the Wall Street establishment.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I have dear friends on both sides of that category, so and obviously I know a lot of hedge fund guys, and I also have a lot of friends that are activist investors, so to speak. But in this environment, I'm concerned. It's fantastic. They made history. They said, let me show you what we can do when we have a large number of people that make a decision. But the challenge with it is they think they're punishing the hedge fund bad guys that are shorting, but there are hedge fund guys on the other side. They're on the long side, and all you're doing is helping them. It's a delusion. And the biggest delusion is because GameStop is not worth $450 a share. And I was saying to my friends, or whatever, it was 430, I forget where it topped out. But I was saying to my friends who were like beating on their chest, saying, look what we did. And I was like, listen, I'm really proud that you took action and decided what you wanted to do. But investing for emotion always ends in disaster. There is no exception for it, because fear and greed are two emotions that are in every creature. There may not be in your conscious self, but in the survival self, they're there. And what happens when the stock is not worth that and you drove it all the way up? What happened? I talked to them about it just the days it was happening. I said, guys, this is a pyramid scheme. You don't even know what you're saying. Look what we did to these guys. We hurt them. But many of the people you encourage this are going to get hurt. Because in a pyramid scheme, maybe you'll make money. Maybe you're the first to get out while it's still high. But everybody else is going to lose a ton of money. And it's already happened. I'm sure you saw the stock today was between $50 and $90 instead of $430. What's the difference between 440, let's use a round number, to what is it right now, $63, right? I think it was what I saw earlier today. I think it's where it ended the day. I mean, that is a level of loss that is insane. And all you did is, oh, look how great and special I am. And you got everybody else to do it too. Now, some people are going to laugh and smile and go, but I made all this money on it. Well, yeah, you got out, but who did you hurt? And that's the very thing you were supposedly against. These companies don't just short stocks to short them. They short them because they believe the value is not there, right? Now, I know some people manipulate. That's true, unfortunately, every part. Somebody go out and I don't know how they get by with this stuff. They short it, and then they go out and talk down the stock and so forth. And I know that happens. But it's the same thing that's happening on the side. We're talking up the stock on Reddit. We're going to punish these guys. You will be punished if you don't add value. And just running up a stock is not adding value, because in the end, there has to be something there. The party stops and the chairs are gone, and these people are going to fall down. So I feel really bad, honestly, for these individual investors. But I think there's a larger issue here. We're taking this mentality of us versus them that has become part of the political process. And for the first time in human history, it's involved in investing. I was just with Paul Tudor Jones a couple of days ago, and we're talking about this. He's saying, I want to write a letter to these people because, it didn't hurt him in any way. That's not how he's operating. But they got to understand what the impact is. And I said, I know, brother, I've been sharing with everybody. But the emotion just gets so strong, and the egos of everybody gets so strong on all sides, not just one side of it. So I really feel for these people. But the bigger issue is what's happening with technology. Technology is changing the world faster than we are evolving emotionally and psychologically. And so that's a challenge. I mean, when people say change is happening rapidly, it is nothing compared to what's coming. And you go, oh, what is it going to be? Robotics, AI? No, it's a convergence. I mean, space change, energy change, food production change, AI change, IT, the nanotechnology is what I meant to say. All of these elements are going to converge with all these measurement devices that are everywhere. And the world is changing so rapidly, but we're not emotionally fit yet. You talk about, emotional intelligence is a wonderful thing, but intelligence is a set of capabilities. You can be capable of being really smart and be dumb, right? We all have done it. I've certainly done it. But the truth is, a state of fitness is different. That's a state of readiness. And we have to become more emotionally fit, and also not be willing to do these extremes that people are so caught up in now. It's part of the stage we're in, where everything is evil, everything is terrible, everything is going to be good forever, everything's going to be terrible forever. That's not how life is. Life is cyclical. And anyone who studies history knows that. So I look for people who are taking technology and creating solutions. So for example, we're all talking about, a green world, and I'm 100% support of that. But the rolling blackouts in California are directly related to not having the right energy facilities. Because here's the great thing about what's happened where we are today. For the first time in history, we have a situation where solar power and wind power is actually cheaper per unit than petroleum. That's a huge breakthrough, but there's not the storage. And so, Elon Musk is working on it, but the devices he's created so much are very toxic. One of them burned out at Walmart. They're not quite there yet, and they're very expensive. But there are people like Bill Gross. I don't know if you know Bill, but Bill's the head of Idea Lab. He's a genius. He's the only man in history to start more than 7 companies from zero and exited them over $1 billion. Not even Elon's done that yet. So, and he's a genius at creation. And what I love about him is he's taking technology and not saying, how do I use this to just get something for me or punish somebody I don't like? He's saying, what can I do for the world? What do I do? Yes, global warming is an issue. So how do we solve it? Instead of just saying, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to fly. He says, that's just not real. But what we can do is use the same technology created pollution, use the same creativity of mankind. Like we created these problems, then we can solve them. And so, for example, he's come up with this brilliant idea called Energy Vault, and it'll probably be his $8 billion company right now. And he came up with a way to store all the solar energy that you're getting during the daytime and you need it at night, right? How to store that at the most efficient platform I've ever seen. He just built this other company called Heliogen that uses solar energy to produce energy that not just for cars, but for giant machines that you can't do with solar. He can actually produce a temperature through this new technology. And Bill Gates just joined us investing in it, where it produces a temperature just below the temperature of the sun. Now, with that kind of creativity, he's got another company doing energy or carbon capture. Those tools are how the world changes. Not let's use technology so I can beat on my chest or try and beat somebody else. That's a no-sum game. The real secret to life is find a way to add more value. What I learned from Jim McGraw so many years ago, do more for others than anybody else. If you keep doing that, you will become abundant. And if that's your focus, you'll be abundant for a lifetime. But if you're playing that zero-sum game and investing, you're going to lose. And already we've seen on GameStop massively for an unbelievable number of people. Imagine if you have a limited amount of money, even if you have a lot of money, but a limited amount of money and you lose 80 or 90% of all that money in a week. That's just what just happened. First, they celebrated on paper, look how rich I am. And then they try to get out. And it's a predictable story. And my hope is that these great human beings that, they're fighting for their own future. They're fighting for things that are right, but you got to pick it in the right way. And using investing as an emotional tool, disastrous.
You started to hit on so many things that I have in my notes to get to. It's GameStop is one thing, and we did see the us versus them, and then there was just this feeding frenzy of these other like meme stocks of Dogecoin. People know that it's not worth anything, but it's almost, it's basically people are seeing a get rich quick scheme.
That's right.
And
there is no get rich quick scheme. When you see somebody got rich overnight, you don't see what they did for 10 years prior to that moment to be in the position to do it. I always tell people, you get rewarded in public for what you practice in private continuously. And you see people so successful, it's because they failed so many times, but they didn't call it failure, they called it learning, right? But you think you're going to do one thing and hit. Anybody can get lucky, but you can get rich by being lucky, but you won't stay rich, right? And I don't mean rich as financially, I mean real wealth. If you're going to have an abundant life where you have a lot of joy and happiness, if you're going to have great health and vitality and great relationships and great economics and a meaningful life, that doesn't happen overnight. Failure is, Jim Rohn just said to me, he said, Tony, failure is failure to call, failure to say I love you, failure to say I'm sorry. Failure, this big massive failure is all these little failures that can accumulate. And so is success. It's doing all the right little things to lead up to it. But that desire for the instant hit, it's just a dopamine hit. It's just people getting their brains wired, right, like a drug. And unfortunately, our society and technology has reinforced it. Today, technology is starting to use us instead of us use technology. Right? You see people banging on their phone. I'm like, oh, look at the guy go, it's going to a satellite. Give it a minute. Come on. Or people so stressed out because they think humans should respond to their instant wish like they're trained to have from technology. So it's nobody's fault. But we got to take back control or we're going to have a lot more disruption than we've seen so far because this convergence I talk about of all these different technologies is going to change the world more than we can imagine. And we're using the same emotions when we're dealing with change that was slow. There used to be change like the Ice Age, the Bronze Age. We used to talk about being in an information society. What are we kidding? The information society died a long time ago. There's too much information. You're starving. I should say you're drowning in information, but you're starving for wisdom. So I think it's where that that component has to be disciplined within yourself, or you're going to get disciplined by life. You're going to get pain. And learning by your own experience, we all do that to some extent. But one of the gifts of my life is early on, I decided, I watched Jim Rohn's "Success Leaves Clues" was his phrase. And I was like, that means anybody succeeded, they're not lucky. They're doing something different than other people. It's not they're screwing everybody. What are they doing different? And if I do the same things, if I plant the same seeds, I can get the same reward. So I can learn by my own experience and maybe never learn or take 10 years. Or I can sit down with somebody who's taken 20 years to figure this out. Lots of trial and error failures. Now they know what to do. I figure out what they do and I do it now. And I compress decades into days. That is the philosophy that has guided my life and given me a huge and meaningful life and some huge sense of impact and meaningful life in helping millions of people.
Decades into days is one thing. You do move fast. We've been, as you said earlier, you've been at this 44 years though. And so I'm curious about your relationship with just patience and any tips from you on growing patience as a skill set, not just financially, but in life.
Well, I'm not patient, so you're asking the wrong guy. I'm patiently compelled is what I call it, right? I should be so impatient. But I think I don't mistake movement for achievement. When you see people they're impatient, they start doing things that don't matter. And it makes them feel like they're being busy and they call that achievement. That's the biggest mistake you could possibly make. Like when it comes to investing, it's not that I'm so patient. It's that I understand you got to keep your eye on the prize. And in investing, like what these people are doing right now is trading. And how many traders do you know have really made money over a 10 or 15 or 20 year period of time? If they manage to do it for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, they're one of the best in the world, but even the best lose it. We've seen guys that made $1 billion a year, hedge fund guys, and now they've lost for several years in a row. So it doesn't work the way people think. Investing, what Warren Buffett would do, what you want to be able to do is make time your ally. That's not patience, that's intelligence. Like if I can take a small amount of money, which anybody can, I mean, you can take a young person who's 19 years old, and if you understand compound interest, the most basic thing we all intellectually understand. But understanding doesn't change your life. Execution does, right? And so you take that kid and you say, listen, put aside $300 a month and invest it and leave it alone. Put it in the stock market. And the kid agrees to do it. Sounds like a lot of money, but living at home anyway, probably at that stage, and they do it. And they do that from the time they're 18 years old till the time they're 28. And it grows at 8% compounded, and they got $1.5 million, $1.8 million when they go to finding out retirement. They did nothing else. They could stop. They only invested for less than 10 years, 9 years. You take somebody else, let them start at 28 or 29, get the same return and do it till they're 65 and they have less money at the end. So I'm just intelligent enough to know it's not about being patient, it's about being smart. And if you're going to be smart, you make time your friend because it takes very little capital to do it. But the other reason some people think is patient, I'm more disciplined in my approach, is because I don't wait around, for things to get there. While that's growing, I'm doing other things to add value so I can invest more, so I can have more impact. At this stage of my life, it's not like, what can I get, right? It's like, how can I grow so there's more to give? Because in the end, people think what they get is going to make them happy, and it never does. Think about whatever you thought was going to make you happy. You might feel happy for how long? A year because you achieved something that was amazing? Hell no. 6 months? Maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, but we're not meant to just hang out and be happy for doing nothing. I always believe and tell people progress equals happiness. And so I'm always making progress. So I don't have to be patient because I'm working on something else that I can improve, something else that I can help, something else that I can grow. I think the secret to patience is know what your outcome is and focus on still making progress. Because in the end, what you get's not going to be happy, but the progress will make you into something that will make you very happy or very sad. And if you feel that feeling, if you're overweight and you start making progress, even if you haven't lost the weight, you're going to feel great. If you get to losing the weight and then you go, I feel so good, how long? You have to keep making progress. We're meant to grow. You grow or you die. We all know that stuff, but we forget it. So if you're not growing your relationship, it's dying. If you're not growing your business, it's dying. You can't kid yourself. So to me, it's about momentum less than it is about patience. I just want to be smart. What works? I'm a student of what works. I'm not into positive thinking. And I think people that do it, I think it's better than negative thinking, but come on. If you're all positive and you're running around with like a chicken with your head cut off, if you don't have the right strategy, you're in trouble. So my whole focus is, yes, keep yourself in the right emotional, psychological state, but find a way, know what you're after, know what you're here to contribute, find something that's going to drive you beyond yourself, and then get in the game and keep making progress. And when it comes to investing, since we're talking about that in the path, trying to time the market, like thinking you're being patient because we're going to wait for the market to come down. Do you know how many people have been waiting to be patient since 2008 and have missed, 400% run up in the market as a whole if you've done nothing but been in there? I mean, it's completely absurd. And there's research. You don't have to say, oh, that's Tony's idea. You know, JP Morgan did a study years ago, and they studied 20 years and said the S&P over those 20 years went up 8%. But then they did a little research. What if you tried to time the market and you were only out of the market 10 of the best days in those 20 years, just 10 days. And instead of an 8% return, you got 4.5%. What if you're out of the market just 20 days in 20 years and they were top days? Well, now you went down to 2.5%. And if you're out, just think of this, 30 days out of 20 years, that's all it would take. Those days being out, because you thought you could time the market, you made zero return. You've been better off putting in treasuries today and wouldn't have taken all that risk for what people did. But here's the most ironic thing, Josh. 6 out of 10 of the biggest days in the last 20 years were within 2 weeks of the lowest days, 10 worst days. So it's so counterproductive. So it's not about, timing the market. Listen, Ray Dalio, people like that, they'll tell you, this is a fool's errand. You're playing poker with, it's harder than, like Ray was saying to me when I first met him, he said, Tony, this is harder than like the Olympics. In the Olympics, you train for 4 years, compete with the best in the world, and you're done. This is 24-hour days playing against the best on earth, and you are not going to win in that trading long term. You might do in a few moments, but you're not going to win long term. So why not set yourself up to win by just understanding it's not timing the market, it's time in the market. That's what's going to get you financial security and freedom.
You mentioned the speed with which technology is changing, and another thing that's moving fast these days is the news. We're living in wild times. So it would seem to those of us who have only lived the lives that we're actually in right now. And so it's been a strange year already. It's been a strange few years. I'm just curious. So much of this news, it doesn't seem irrelevant. It seems monumental in like history. And so we have to keep living and doing our best to be our best. And I'm wondering, what is your strategy for not letting, the moment distract you?
I think it's one of the most important disciplines a human being can have. Like with work with Paul Tudor Jones, one of the biggest things is your ability to let go and not let the moment overcome you, that know that you are more than anything that ever happened to you. You got to find some part of your heart or your soul or your belief in God or the universe or whatever it is that allows you to know there's something immutable in you that's beyond the moment. And, the news, again, they're not bad people. They're just trying to, make their business work. It's a business today. And, we all know what clickbait is, right? What do people respond to? We know the news is not about educating you anymore. It's not about informing you anymore. It's about one thing: startle you. If I can startle you, I can get your attention and get you to click on me or watch me or respond to me. And so I'm sure your readers have seen The Social Dilemma, or maybe read Lanier's book, or people like that describing what happens in social media. They literally have scientists who understand how to click off your dopamine. They know how to reinforce you so you feel good and you keep believing what you're believing, and then startle you with something that disrupts you or angers you, upsets you, and it makes you spend more time on the TV set, more time on your computer, more time on your phone, and they're paid for every moment you're there. And it's like, there's no guide to, does this make sense or not, right? If you Google and you ask about global warming and they see how you've tracked before, they feed you what you want to hear. It's a fact. One person can hit global warming and it says it's a farce. That, throughout human history, there have been waves of heat changes over the centuries. And you go to another one that says you're going to die in 12 years, right? And two people can be sitting in the same city in Google, but they're fed something different because it has nothing to do with serving you. It's how do I keep you online?
Well,
it's how do I make more money off you? I believe the most important discipline, if you want to ask that, is what makes me feel good is I'm a student of history. There's a book that was written years ago. I think I picked up in like 1991, 92, one of those throwaway book bins. I always look at those because I'm a contrarian. I like to see the opposite of what people aren't interested in and why, as well as what seems to be popular. And it's called The Fourth Turning. And I highly recommend people pick it up. I first read the book Generations, which not many people will because it's about, I think, 800 pages. But I was working with President Clinton at the time, and he said, Tony, it's one of the most incredible books. This will help you understand Anglo-American history, 500 years, and you can relate it to today. But what they found is there are cycles of history. There's 1,000 years of Roman history, you can do it, 500 years of Anglo-American history. And what they showed is there's these 4 seasons or cycles where a generation, you and I might be an exception, but a generation is raised a certain way because the way what their parents went through. If their parents were going in the Depression, they want that baby boom generation to have the best college, the best everything. I'm going to give them everything on earth and tell them they're smarter than I am, and they're going to be better than I am, and they're going to believe that shit eventually, right? And that affects the way they grow up. And those baby boomers originally were the counterculture, and they raised kids, but there was no baby on board. The kids were kind of lucky kids. They were pushed in front of the TV while they're working to change the world in their mind in some way. But those kids grew up in a totally different way, the X generation, as have the millennials. So we're all shaped to some extent by the generation, and that is what creates the pages of history. So knowing that, the fourth turning, just think of it as seasons. When things are going well, people think it's going to be springtime forever. Any idiot knows that's not true. When things are terrible and it's wintertime and it's dark and stormy, I think it's going to be terrible forever. We're in winter right now. It's predictable. In fact, it's predicted over time in history. We go through 15, 20-year cycles of human emotion, and they affect us. Not everyone individually, but collectively affects society. And so what helps me to know is, look, winter's not forever. Some people die and freeze to death in winter. Other people, learn to snowboard and ski and be with their family and prepare and be by a warm fire because they know that winter's not forever. And so I think it's understanding the cycles of history helps me. But the other part is, Jim Rohn used to have this phrase. I really want to honor him since you brought him up. He's such a beautiful man. He used to say, Tony, he said, think about this. He said, if you had, because I was struggling with something, and different people tell me different things, right? And very much like today, you go on the web, who knows what the truth is anymore? It's just ridiculous. And then you get fact checkers and then check out who the fact checker is and you find out who they are and you go, you got to be kidding me. They're using this to say this is accurate. This person who's completely stilted in a different direction, right? So, but he used to say, Tony, if your worst, enemy drops sugar in your coffee, what's going to happen to you? And I said, nothing. You can have sweet coffee. And then he'd say, well, what if your best friend or your mother, your father, your brother, or sister, or somebody you love drops 1 drop of strychnine in your coffee? What's going to happen? I said, you're going to die. I said, what's your point? He said, well, life is both sugar and strychnine, so watch your coffee. And what he really meant was, he used to say, stand guard at the door of your mind so you know what's going in and take control of it. Because if you don't discipline your disappointment, if you just allow the world to come in and take you, then you don't have control of your own life. And I'm not willing to do that. So I discipline my disappointment. I have to stay informed because I work with millions of people in 100 plus countries, 195 countries now. So I got to know what people are thinking and hearing, but I limit the amount of input and I'm selective. I really try to think as critically as I can because in the world we're in today, anything. I mean, there's fake visuals now, right? These visual fakes that you can make anybody say anything. I mean, we're living in a world where truth seems to disappear. So the only way to stay strong and centered is be clear on what you want to serve, keep growing, and stand guard at the door of your mind and make sure you're feeding your brain something besides clickbait. Jim Rohn used to say, read 30 minutes a day, read a book, read something on philosophy or strategy or tools. Don't read you can read for entertainment, but give yourself 30 minutes where you feed the mind because whatever you feed that mind is what your life's going to come out with. And I've lived that since I was 17 years old. So it's been a few decades.
I'm glad that you talked about sort of living through the winter because it's one thing. The news maybe has affected the way that events unfold, but events themselves right now for some people, some of them are pretty troubling. Not to mention the pandemic and the businesses and the lives, the businesses that have been lost, the kids staying home from school, maybe not learning as much. It's a tough time. It's a troubling time for a lot of people.
It is.
And so I wonder how do you suggest people maintain their faith that life will continue to get better as it always has. We're aware of that, but man, it's a tough one right now.
Yeah. I'd say understand the only difference between fear and faith. What's the difference? What is it? They're both made up. You don't know what the future is going to hold. Fear is imagination undirected. Faith is imagination directed. This is how it's going to be. Fear, you don't have to do anything for it. It's automatic. And in the world we're in today, it is the dominant emotion out there because we've somehow managed to forget a four-letter word that people want to avoid at all costs, and yet it is the secret to success. If you want to succeed, the cover of your magazine at any level, in business, in finance, in your contribution, in your world, you have to learn to deal with this four-letter word. It doesn't start with an F. It's risk. And for the first time I can remember in my 60 years of being alive, people now are avoiding risk at all costs over little risks and making them giant in their head and believing anybody will tell them how big that risk is. I mean, you just got to think about it. This country was created by people willing to risk their lives for freedom. People all over this world, the freedoms that we have are people that went to war and risked their lives for freedom. The people that have, social justice that do have it today, the people that Martin Luther King and people like that came before to give them freedoms. There may be imbalances, but those freedoms are created by people willing to risk their lives for social justice. So we're in a radically different world where all of a sudden we can't risk anything and we don't even measure the risk. So, oh my God, I could catch something. Listen, 1.2 million people die every year of a car accident, right? That's 3,300 people a day, roughly 3,200 people a day. And yet we don't even talk about it. 2 million people are going to die this year of AIDS. No one even speaks about it. 2.2 million people have died of COVID if the numbers are accurate, which there's lots of science questioning that today. So you look at these things and you go, 1.4 million people die of tuberculosis. It's totally something you can catch from anybody, and we haven't shut down the world. But the consequences of us not willing to deal with those risks and the way governments have approached it, look at the UN, there's 225 million people are going to go hungry this year. Many are going to die. Almost twice the amount we ever see any other time, not because of COVID, because our willingness not to take a risk to be so careful. In reality, it's like anybody's death is horrible, but they happen. Are you going to stay home and never drive your car again because 1.2 million people die? Of course not. You would say, are you insane? So how do you do it? Faith. You don't have to learn to have faith. You were born with it. Faith is you drive down the street, if you can get out of your house these days, and there's nothing but a yellow line separating you from somebody coming at you 65 miles an hour. And every day, people fall asleep at the wheel, they're drunk, they're texting, and they come across and kill people every single day on earth. And yet we leave our house and we drive our cars. Why are we willing to take that risk? Because we know if we don't, we have no life. But that's the piece that's challenging for people now. So my thing is, you got to learn to take control of your mind. I'll give your readers three things. These are three decisions they're making right now, even as they're speaking to me. Somebody's saying, oh, he's not taking this serious enough. People are dying. Of course I take serious enough. Are you crazy? I live my life to make sure I'm feeding 100 million people a year, 100 million meals a year. I'm looking for people that, don't have eyesight. I've provided 500 people with surgery so they can see. I got a lot of compassion in my soul. I don't just have mental compassion or virtual signaling. My feet move that way. My wallet moves that way. My heart moves that way. But if you don't take control of these three decisions, you are a puppet. The first decision is, what are you going to focus on? And most of us make this decision unconsciously. We let the world grab our focus. It's what triggers in your pocket. It's what someone says to you. It's whether they're wearing a mask or not. We let the environment be our trigger for focus. And whatever pattern of focus you have is the quality of your life. Because focus, whatever you focus on, you're going to feel. It creates emotion. And whatever emotions you have are going to control your decisions of action. What are you going to do? So think of it this way just for a second for your listeners or readers or viewers. There are patterns of focus. Like, I'm going to ask you, your people watching right now, do you tend to focus more on what you have as a pattern or more on what's missing? Now, when I ask that question to an audience of 15, 20,000 people and they're achievers, about 80% focus more on what's missing. Now, what's wrong with that? Nothing. It just will never make you happy. How can you possibly stay happy? Don't think of it as you. There's nothing wrong with you. Think of it as software running this machine right now. If I'm always focused on what's missing, how can I sustain happiness? Never. That's why you have people that have achieved unbelievable amounts of success at every level, contribution to society, in their business, their family, their economics, but it's never enough and they're never happy because they don't actually focus on what they have. Now, don't get me wrong. Noticing what's missing in business so you can handle it, great. But when you're doing it constantly because it becomes your mental habit, it doesn't matter how much money you make, how many beautiful friends you have, how many beautiful children, how many people give you awards or acknowledge you, respect you. You're going to be miserable. You're going to be frustrated, stressed, overwhelmed. But then think of another pattern. Do you tend to focus more on what you can control or can't control? Now, my audiences, they usually come to an event because they know there are things they can take control of. We can't control everything. We can't control society. We can influence things, but we can control this inner world. And if you control this inner world, you can get yourself to make a difference in the outer world. And what happens for people is they tend to, my audiences tend to focus more on what they can control. But with COVID and constant induction that the world is a dangerous place, now you should wear 2 masks when one doesn't work, right? Or you should stay in your home forever. You should never go outside. You should never do anything. I mean, come on. Where's your common sense gone that you're allowing people to put you in a state of such fear? And what is it? You focus on what you can't control. There are many things you can, regardless of what's happening outside. And then the third one, do you focus more on the past, the present, or the future? And so many people are like, oh, I lost in the past. Listen, if I'd done that, I would be out of business. And I have 74 companies, but my education business, which is my mission, that'd be gone right now. Because imagine, overnight, I remember somebody calling me and we had a big, I had a 60th birthday party last year. And I said, I don't want to party, but they want to do it. So I said, then it has to have a purpose. I said, let's raise money for Underground Railroads, one of my favorite charities. And I said, these kids are enslaved. There are more kids enslaved than the other time. Let's go do this. And we had this incredible party and we raised $14 million and I added $5 million. So $18 million, $19 million we raised. And I was going to save all these kids. And I was euphoric. And 2 days later, I'm getting calls saying, are you going to cancel your event in San Jose? And why would I cancel? We have 13,000 people. It's going to be the most incredible event. And they're like, no, but all the stuff's happening. And I said, well, I was on stage the previous year in Australia and I got mercury poisoning. I burned a hole in my esophagus. I lost 1/3 of my blood supply. And the doc says, you'll be here for 5 days. I said, I got a seminar. He goes, you can't get up there. I said, I'm leaving. So I did the seminar in a wheelchair. And so that mindset, my focus was how do I find a way to serve no matter what? How do I break through the limitations that everybody else has around me? I just won't settle. And so if I would have settled, it'd be crazy. So the next few days, they canceled my event. Then they canceled in Australia and London and Moscow, everywhere in the world, Sydney, Australia. So all I did was keep changing because I knew the mission. So the faith has to be not just faith. It's like in the Bible, it says faith without works is dead, right? You can't just have faith. You got to have some action behind that faith. And so how do you build it? You come back to your core. You stop listening to everything else. You listen, you take it input, but you become your own authority. You do your own homework and you make decisions what's right. And you know that life is risky. Jim Rohn used to say, life's so risky, you're not going to get alive. That's how risky it is, right? So you got to take some risks or you're not going to have a life. And I think that's what it is. Certainty is something you generate inside. You're never going to get certainty from the outside world. And if you look for it right now, we're in a time of such uncertainty. But guess what? It's always had been that way, right? It's just right now, it's manifested in really intense ways. We go through cycles and we're in that cycle of fear. It won't last forever. Your job is free yourself from it so you can have a quality life and help other people do the same, ideally.
Back to that topic of financial freedom, and I'll leave you with this one, Tony. A lot of investors, and I guess I'm one of them, we are at times consumed by regret. I regret opportunities that I missed that turned out to be huge. And there are chances that come up, opportunities that come up that I don't take because I'm afraid that I'll regret it if I do. And so I'm neither here nor there. And I imagine that regret is not something that absorbs you, or the fear of regret is not something that absorbs you. And so tell me, one, if that's true, confirm it. And two, how do you neutralize regret?
Well, Richard Branson's a friend, and he's a genius. Everybody knows what a genius he is, creativity, but he has a core belief, because I'm always interviewing people. When I first get to know them, we become friends and it becomes natural, right? But his belief is, great opportunities happen about every 15 minutes. And it seems to happen for him because that's his belief, because he believes and looks for it. He doesn't live in a scarce world, and so his world is not scarce. And so I'd be lying to say I didn't live in a world of total scarcity. I grew up in a world of total scarcity where nothing was possible. But along the way, I've had experiences where when I felt the most uncertainty, when I felt the most regret, I decided I don't want to feel regret. So the only way not to feel regret is give my all, and I'm not going to be in control of the outcomes. As long as I learn from the outcomes, then I don't have any regret. If I don't learn, then there should be some regret. And then how do I get out of it? Figure out what I miss so it doesn't happen again. I mean, how many people's lives, I don't know, in your own life, Josh, has anything ever happened, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago that was so difficult, so horrible, so painful, you'd never want to go through it again. You never want anybody in your family to go through it. But you look back 5, 10, 15 years and go, I'd never want to go through it again. but I see a higher intelligence in it, right? I see how it made me stronger, and now I can do things I wouldn't have done without it, or it made me more compassionate and care more, or it gave me an insight. Have you had anything like that ever happen?
Definitely, of course.
And I think we all have. So one of the ways that I have regret is to say, if I learn, there's no regret. Going into regret makes you freeze, as you said. It either freezes you to not even start, or it freezes you afterwards. And what happens is when you beat yourself up, you think maybe somehow you're proving to yourself how committed you are, you're showing you weren't smart, but all that does is lower your energy. And the lower your energy is, the less quality thinking you're gonna have, the less quality emotion, and usually the worse behavior. So what it does is failure begets more failure. You just gotta see it. I'll give you an example. I have a dear friend named Peter Guber. He was the chairman of Sony and Columbia and TriStar. We own some sports teams together. He owns the LA Dodgers. He owns the Golden State Warriors. Together we own the LAFC football club and so forth. Just a genius of a man. And early in our friendship, I've known him for about 30 years. Early in our friendship, I remember we had this conversation one day, and I was saying, Peter, I said, you don't let anything stop you. I mean, you don't seem to be afraid of failure or rejection anyway. And he goes, Tony, it's not true. He said, I have those fears. He said, I just don't let them control me. And I said, where do you think that came from? He goes, I know exactly where it came from. He said, I'll tell you a story. So he tells me a story, and I'll tell you the briefer version of it, but the essence of it was, he was a little boy growing up in Massachusetts, and he lived, I think, if I remember right, on a little 2-story. He was on the 2nd story, and he said he looked out one day, and there was a neighbor across the street who was a little boy who had a set of physical challenges, handicaps, and one day he saw the father take the boy out with a bicycle, 2-wheel bicycle with 2 little training wheels, and he helped him get on initially, and then he gave him a push. And the kid was like this and fell on the ground and started to cry. And the father looked at him. He couldn't hear what he's saying, but saying something to him, and he wouldn't get up. So the father got up and left him, fallen on the sidewalk with a bike on top of him, and went upstairs to the 2nd floor and stood there and looked down on his son. And he said, that boy struggled and struggled and struggled. And he said, I was so mad. He goes, Tony, this didn't just happen once. He said, it was like my morning nightmare. I'd get up in the morning, look out, and they did it again. And he fell again, and the father would leave, and he'd be up there staring down. And he goes, I went to my mom and said, you got to do something. This is not right. And his mom said, people have their own privacy, stay out of their lives. And he said, I was just hurting so much. Little boy, feeling this boy hurt. And, as you tell him the story, I'm a kind of empath myself, so I'm feeling myself on the verge of tears as he told the story. He's such a great storyteller, he is, Peter Guber. And so I said, so what happened? He said, Tony, it happened day after day after day. And he said, one day his dad came out and he did it and gave him a shove. And he turned and walked up, and the kid fell, turned and walked up, and the kid righted himself up, got on the bike himself, and pushed himself, and he started going and going and going. He said he went going, he circled, he stopped, up there cheering for him. He said he circled back, and then he fell, but he got up like triumphant, with this giant smile on his face. And Peter said he looked up and he saw the guy in the window, the father, and he was jumping up and down and celebrating. And he said, Tony, I learned that day that he was a great dad, that he could have done it all for his son. And then his son would never have the strength to face life and to deal with what he had to deal with. And he said, that day I decided that, all rejection, all failure is like, it's a little bump on the road. Right? So what do they call those things? He calls them when you're driving, that stops you. A speed bump. He said, it's just a little speed bump to success. And he said, Tony, I'll tell you where I really remembered it most. He said, I forgot how old he was. I think he was only like 34, 35 years old and became the president of this movie studio, Columbia. And the man who was supposed to be the president, everybody thought was going to be president, was this 55-year-old war hero, and just like everybody loved this guy. But Peter got it because he was anticipating the future. He knew he was studying VHS, and everybody thought he was nuts and where the market was going to be. So people at Columbia saw him, and they went for him for the leadership at that age. And it was not a happy experience. And so Peter, tried his best to connect with this guy, but he was his clear adversary. The guy was trying to hope he would fail. Made it very clear he's going to fail. I'm going to take his spot. And Peter said the first movie he gave the green light for, they came for the premiere of this movie. And he said, Tony, it was the worst film you could ever imagine. I was sitting in my seat trying to how do I get out of here? He said, I was squirming. It was just horrible. It's my first one and I approved it. It's so bad. He said, afterwards, nobody even clapped. People looked over at him, from the company. And this war hero guy comes walking up to him, right? And he looks at him and he goes, I bet you're scared. And Peter looked at him, took a breath and said, I am scared, but I'm going to tell you one thing. It's not going to stop me. I'm moving forward. He goes, I'll tell you why. And he told this guy the story. And by the end of the story, this warrior guy had a little tear in his eye. And he goes, then that's why I'm going to keep moving forward no matter what. And the man looked at him, took a long pause, and he said, Peter, you're a good man. And he said, he went from my adversary to my advocate. And all it was understanding life is not supposed to be this easy, I don't have to worry. There's no challenge, no regret part. What makes you not have regret is you use whatever life gives you. You use your mistakes and you move forward. And to me, there's no better important lesson in life. It's the lesson you want for your children. It's the lesson we want for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think over time we all learn it. Whether we like it or not, it's coming for us all.
It is.
Tony, thank you so much for the time. Thanks for being such a great friend to success.
It's been great to see you. Take good care of yourself, Josh.
And thank all of you for sticking with us. We'll see you very soon.